to Athletes, Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, where we've created a centralized platform for athletes and other alumni to network and connect and tap into various resources like financial, career services, health, mental health. But more importantly, this show is all about athletes transitioning out of sports. And it's a major issue today where athletes are done and they just kind of think of themselves as that athlete and they struggle either financially or it could be for, again, mental health reasons. But we interview former collegiate professional athletes and talk about their successful transition out of sports into successful business leadership, entrepreneurship. So excited today to have my buddy on here, Jason Frank. How you doing, Jason?
Doing great, Rob. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we were talking about this offline. We're getting Jason all fired up for this podcast. He looks good. He's got the background. We're ready to go. So Jason played baseball at Central Michigan, and then when he was out, he got into teaching and coaching right out, but just decided that he wanted to do a little more than that. So got back and got a master's, and he got into student athlete development, and that's something that he still does today for many years. He's been at multiple schools and done a great job. So we're going to get more into that and talk about some of the great things you're doing at UNLV today. So let's start out and talk about playing sports growing up. How did that shape you leading up into college?
Yeah, I think, when I was really young, I wasn't that into sports. I didn't play t-ball or anything like that. I started watching baseball when I was 8 years old. My Uncle Bill got me into watching the Chicago Cubs on WGN with Harry Carey. And so I kind of got into baseball. I started playing the next year. I was not good at all. My first year, I was on a team that went 0-14 in our league, and I had 3 hits that year, and I pitched one time and just got lit up. But I started to, I continued to follow baseball. I started following basketball and football. I got better as I kept playing, especially in baseball. Started playing basketball. And I was fortunate, not being somebody who was overly athletic. I didn't run fast. I couldn't jump high, anything like that. But being a big sports fan, and I was fortunate in that I went to a small high school. I was from a small town in Southwest Michigan. So I played basketball all 4 years of high school, baseball all 4 years of high school. And then I never played football competitively. And my senior year, I went out and I played, and I started every game, played every offensive down at tight end. So I was very fortunate in that I went to a school the size that I did, because I was able to get some of those experiences and get that competitive nature out, and learn some of those lessons that you learn through athletics. Where if I'd gone to a bigger school, I probably would have been able to play baseball. I would have been able to pitch at a bigger school. But basketball, I might have been like the last guy on the bench at best. Football, I definitely wouldn't have been able to play after having not played before. So I think, growing up and following sports and reading about sports and reading biographies and autobiographies of baseball, basketball, football players. I think, and I tell my students who I work with, as we talk about how they can use their experience as an athlete to help them in the future. People say, well, athletes are hardworking. Athletes they know how to be good teammates, and they know about teamwork. They know this, they know that, they get that. And I always say, it gives you an opportunity and gives you a platform to develop those skills. But I always ask them, I'm like, hey, you've had bad teammates, right? You've had teammates who don't work hard, right? And they're like, yeah. I said, it's not an automatic guaranteed thing that you're an athlete and then you get all these qualities, but you have a great platform and you have a great opportunity to learn those things. And I think growing up and as I got into high school with those opportunities to play more than I would have at some other places, I was able to develop some of those skills.
That's great. And then, so did you dream of being a Major League Baseball player or another athlete, another sport?
Oh yeah. I mean, I definitely saw myself, being on a big league mound. I remember being at the new Comiskey Park in Chicago one year. I was at a game with my dad. I was looking down at the mound and I was like, I might be out there someday. And it was interesting because Kevin Tapani was pitching for the White Sox that day. Kevin Tapani played collegiately at Central Michigan. So it's kind of funny, but so I still remember that. And if I wasn't going to be a player, I wanted to be a broadcaster. I would drive my parents nuts when I was young. I would turn the sound off on games, and I would do play-by-play, baseball, basketball, football. And, sometimes I'd record on, a tape recorder and listen back. But that was something that I wanted to do as kind of like the backup plan if I didn't make it as a player. And I held on to those dreams of playing professionally for quite a while. I mean, I had a very successful high school career pitching, had a lot of Division III offers, and then chose to walk on at Central Michigan Division I. I knew how to pitch. I was competitive. I had a lot of movement on my pitches. The biggest issue though, as far as a pro career, was that I topped out at about 84, 85 miles an hour with my fastball. So, and I was often at like 82, 83. So, especially for a right-handed pitcher, there's not a lot of, there's not a big market for that. Even back then when velocity wasn't as big of an issue as it is now. But, and I was able to play a little bit at CMU, my redshirt freshman year, pitching 11 games. Thought I was maybe building up to something, and pitched really well in summer leagues that I played in. And, but, the velocity just never got there. And it's, it wasn't like something I held on to. So I was able to kind of gradually realize that dream wasn't going to be realized, and it wasn't a thing where up until the draft or after my career ended, where like, oh, I still have a shot. It kind of phased out over my third, fourth, fifth year in college.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously that happens a lot. I mean, that's great. I dreamed of being a Major League Baseball player. I always joke around, didn't have the talent, so I do podcasts and other things now. But it's when you got into school, and so you've got an interesting story. You walked on the team and all that, but ultimately, like you said, when you were done, you knew you weren't going to get drafted. Was there programs when you were at Central Michigan, kind of addressing that athlete transition out of sport, kind of what's next, and not just like a one day, workshop. I mean, more like, curriculum, like whether it was a class or anything like that back then?
Well, I think when I was there at CMU, they did a very good job with, the NCAA used to call it the Champs Life Skills Program, that they kind of mandated, I think, for Division I athletic departments to have, where it was life skills. So you have financial literacy workshops, you have, career workshops, you do these different programs. Again, a lot of times it's on a Monday night here, Monday night there. But CMU did actually a very good job where Herb Duramity, College Football Hall of Famer, was on the College Football Playoff Committee a few years ago. But Herb was the athletic director. I don't know how much he had to do with it, but he definitely supported the idea and kind of enforced coaches to make sure that everybody attended these workshops. And I think freshmen had to go to like 7 or 8 different things per semester. Sophomores had 4 or 5, juniors had 2 or 3, and seniors had 1 or 2 that they had to attend. And they had like workshops. What can I do with a major in this? What can I do? They had people from different academic departments come and talk about careers. And so I think that CMU did a pretty good job back at that time. And that programming was part of what inspired me, I think, to get into this field, doing the academic advising piece, but then also I always wanted to set up programming like that. And it's never been part of my official job duty. I kind of got a tutor coordinator early in my career, and I did that for about 7 years. But I've always been excited to assist with different programs like that. At Grand Canyon, when I was there, I kind of organized our first networking night where got members of the Arizona Diamondbacks front office staff, people doing marketing and legal and all these different areas, group sales, coming in to meet with our student athletes and starting that. So and a lot of that just was planted at CMU. When I was here in grad school at UNLV, Jason Linders, who I worked with a long time at multiple schools, Jason and I led the Champs Life Skills program for a year. It was just for freshman student athletes here at that time. But yeah, so I think there were things there where CMU did a pretty good job of having that programming where it's like, okay, be prepared to go pro in something other than sports,
Right.
as the old MPA commercials used to say. And so I think and I had kind of I had a big athlete identity even as a walk-on, but I still kind of had a student identity, a pretty strong student identity as well, and saw that there were even if I had a 10-year career in the pros, there was going to be something after that too. So I had to be prepared for it.
Yeah, and that's what I think. What happens is, we see it. I guess a lot of maybe more like, let's say, Division I football players, or some of these
Mm-hmm.
athletes, their aspirations. I'm going to be pro, and they put their head down, and that's what they're going for. But I think maybe in some of the other sports, where like I've talked to some different, like, let's say former female basketball players, or swimmers or golfers, where, well, golfers is a professional, but bottom line is there's not as much of an opportunity, and so they know, like you just said, that in the future they're still going to need to look for something, and that's something that we really try to encourage, is that you need to look at that. Like, I talked to one guy, and he just said that he really wishes that he would have had a mandatory, like a 4-week workshop or a class that taught, like you said, what CMU was doing with the life skills, is just, but over a period of time, not just a one and done kind of thing, but over a period of time, that would have really helped once he was out. And then I guess maybe kind of a segue to that question: are there efforts that you see in the different athletics departments that you've been in to kind of help the alumni athletes as well? So obviously, once they're out, I mean, there's a lot of these alumni athletes that struggle. Are there programs that schools are trying to implement to help them, or are they kind of more just focused on the current athletes?
Yeah, there's obviously the day-to-day focus being on the current student athletes with progressing towards graduation, meeting the eligibility benchmarks, and then kind of helping to set them up to be successful after their careers are done. As far as specific programs for alumni athletes, um, not a lot of formal things that I can think of, but I do know at South Florida, especially, we had a program. Jason Linder started it with trying to get former athletes who did not graduate, getting them back into school to finish up, which could also help with the NCAA academic progress rate, for that particular team. And being willing to do some of that outreach, and being willing to help if they reach out, but not a lot of, hey, we had so much going on with the current students and the incoming students and potential transfers and potential student athletes who are coming in, that sometimes it's difficult to focus on those former athletes unless they kind of reach out for that extra help. There are some great programs. I know with former NFL players, they have the Players Trust and AthLife, and also AthLife deals with NHL and Major League Soccer and so on. So we're seeing more of these programs develop now from individual athletic departments. Again, it's difficult because I think everybody's
Right.
so busy with focusing on
On the
who's
current.
here, who's about to be here, who's potentially going to be here, and coaches are obviously focused on that for the future going forward. But just going back also to what you were talking about with football, basketball, maybe being where they have that higher athlete identity, and it might be more difficult for them with that transition. My master's thesis here at UNLV, the title of it was "The Athletic, Academic, and Social Experiences of Intercollegiate Team Sports Student or Female Intercollegiate Team Sports Student Athletes." So I interviewed softball, women's soccer, women's basketball student athletes who were at the end of their careers. And what a lot of people, even a lot of faculty, maybe don't realize, I think sometimes there's the assumption that, it's an Olympic sport, or it's not a revenue producing sport, so they're going to be more focused on school and all that. the athlete identity is still very high in those
Sure.
sports too. But like you said, there might be a little bit more of that realistic, okay, I'm going to have to do something else. I'm not going to be able to play my sport forever. And so there tends to be a little bit more of that preparation for life after sport, but the athlete identity is still very high, and school sometimes does take in fact, even where they choose to go to school, a lot of times the academic piece of that takes a back seat to the athletic side.
Yeah, and I think that even as a recruiting tool, I think if a school, if an athletic department has a program where they're not only focusing on the current athletes, obviously that's important, but also outreach to the alumni athletes and helping them too in that whole process afterwards. I think it could be a valuable tool. Like, as a parent, you could say, okay, well, I've got my student athlete and I'm looking at 3 or 4 different schools and they might offer similar things, but I know this one school is going to care about my student athlete beyond their college career. I think that's something that could be valuable.
Yeah, and the NCAA is also putting some things in recent years, kind of with support for athletes who have not graduated, going back to finish and earn their degree. But again, like you said, sometimes even with that degree, and they play professionally, or they have some opportunities post college. But it can still be challenging to transition a career. It's one thing if you graduate, but then transitioning into a career. The importance of networking, the importance of informational interviews. I always encourage my students to do informational interviews, even as freshmen. And there are certain classes, like here at UNLV, some of the first year experience classes here require informational interviews. And I tell my students, like, that's very valuable to be able to reach out to somebody who has a career that you think might be something you want to do, and learn about their path and get advice from them. And you start to also build your network that way too. You reach out to them, stay in touch with them periodically. They might be able to introduce you to other people to talk to. Even well into my career, when I got to Grand Canyon, I was not at that director, assistant AD type level yet. So I reached out about once or twice a month to different people in my field, some who I knew and some who I didn't know that well, and just like, hey, have 30 minutes to talk. And some would, most of the time they'd give me 60 minutes or an hour and a half,
Right.
and you just pick their brain and learn about and just get all this advice that can help out. And I'm also at a point in my career, as we've talked about, I'm also trying to look for other potential opportunities that might be a better fit going forward. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty in college athletics right now, especially in like the academic side, and what are things going to look like in 5 years. And I've been doing this for a long time now. It's been 16
Right.
years full time. I've been part of college athletics for about 25 years now, most of the last 25 years. Is there something else that's out there? I mean, I've done 3 informational interviews in the last 2 weeks with people in this one field that I'm potentially interested in, and just hearing about all that. So I think it's always valuable. You can always learn something, and it's tough for college students, and it's tough for, I think, all of us
Right.
to reach out and ask for that. I think college students now, especially, it's difficult for them to, even though they're connected and social media, and they've had technology, it's a lot of them really struggle um, with being able to reach out to somebody. So I'm always like, hey, let's look at my LinkedIn connections. Hey, this person, hey, this was one of my college teammates, or I worked with this person at South Florida, or I know this was one of the tutors I hired at Wyoming. Hey, I can do an introduction,
Right.
and kind of put that together and try to ease that, discomfort of reaching out. But informational interviews, I think, are very big. I know you asked a question a few minutes
No,
ago, and
you
I can't bounce
yeah,
all three
he already,
different
so
areas, but
Jason was, yeah, Jason was reading my mind. I was going to ask him about networking, connecting. He went right into it, didn't need the question. He started feeding the information, but yeah, it's so important, to network and connect. And Jason does a great job of it. That's something that we're all about, and something I'm so passionate about is that, people want to help. And I think, but you need to have that helping, giving attitude, which Jason is like in the dictionary for that, just willing to, share and help others, because I think that's important. You can't just look at it, what's in it for you, but how do you help other people out, which again is Jason's a living example of that. And I think it's also important to network and connect while you're still playing, because talking to, this comes up on almost every episode, but talking to an agent and just saying that, a lot of times the players so focused on the game, they don't do that. And then when it's time to, the game's over, whether it's retirement, injury, whatever, they're kind of expecting to get that big next job because, hey, here I am, but they didn't build that network. And I think it's something you could start even back when you're in high school. I mean, you have your teammates and their families and friends and coaches, and like you were saying, Jason, talking about just tapping into like mentors and other people along the way. It's just so important to do that and not be afraid to do it. Again, people want to help. You just kind of have to put yourself out there.
Yeah, and I've been around some great examples of people who played professionally, who they were preparing themselves for life after sport. I mean, I mentioned before the show, we were talking about Kayvon Webster, who played at South Florida when I was played football at South Florida when I was there, played for the Denver Broncos and a few other teams, started in the Super Bowl. But Kayvon was doing an internship with the College of Pharmacy at USF as he was training, I think, for the draft. And Sam Barrington, who you've had on this show, Sam worked with Sam at USF, and he was going every winter to his dad's construction equipment company in Africa and kind of helping out there and kind of learning that business. And now he, as you know, he's doing a lot of great things in that field. Brian Clark, I worked with at South Florida. He had played in the NFL for 5 years, but in the off season, he was doing like internship stuff in fundraising, development, college athletic departments, academics. So he did academics for a while. He's been at NC State now, his alma mater, doing fundraising. So you see people like that who, even when they're playing, they're preparing for what's next, and so it's always good to see. And so there are plenty of great examples out there of people who do that and prepare for for life after sport. You talk about networking. A big part of networking too is the people you're around and you're working with, and being able to put forth a good effort and make them. I talk to student groups sometimes, sports business students. Back at GCU, I had professors who would ask me to speak to sports management students, and I would talk about networking, but I would say, there's that cliche that it's not what you know, and then they go, it's who you know. And I was like, yeah, but if you know that person, what's going to make that person want to call you if there's a job opening? And I've been fortunate. I mentioned Jason Linders a couple of times. So he's a former college football coach, assistant coach, got in academics here at UNLV when I was in grad school. And he basically hired me at South Florida, talked me into joining him at Grand Canyon, also worked with him at Chicago State. And, I would say, hey, he helped me. It was that connection. It was who I knew in that case, but he knows a lot of people.
Sure.
Why was he calling me? So you have to put forth that effort. You have to show that you're that you're good at what you do, that you have a positive attitude, that you're willing to work hard, and that you can contribute, because that person, they're putting their name and their reputation on the line if they're bringing you in and hiring you in that situation. So what are you going to do to stand out? So networking's it all starts with the people you're around, your coaches,
Sure.
your academic advisors, professors, people, if you have a part-time job, even the people you're around there. So I think that's something that when we talk about networking sometimes gets lost.
Yeah, no, I agree. So let's kind of shift topics here and talk about alumni engagement. Obviously, important to us here at Alumni Direct. Um, when you were at Central Michigan, was there any movement towards bringing back alumni athletes, but not just for the golf tournaments and the homecoming games, but more to work in not just baseball, just across all sports, to work with the current athletes and help them out?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of it was that those kind of one-offs with, hey, we've got alumni here this weekend. They're going to be in the clubhouse. Say hi. Hey, I award number 39 back in 1974. You'd have that type of stuff that
Right.
would go on. But and I do remember like panel presentations for that life skills program where they would try to get student athlete alumni to speak. We actually did that here at UNLV this spring for our networking night that we had for student athletes. So I think we had 5 former UNLV student athletes, and they were kind of on a panel presentation at the start of the program, and which is great, and I think that's important. I've always kind of wanted to have something together where we have like a student athlete alumni database, and I know that there are some game plan, and I think even Teamworks does some stuff like this where they can get some alumni in there, and it's just places I've been, I've tried to get it started sometimes, and it just hasn't taken off. But having that alumni database, student athlete alumni database, where if I'm sitting here with a student who's like, yeah, I want to major in communications studies, but I just don't know what I can do with that. Well, I'd like to be able to pull up, well, here are 15 former UNLV student athletes who majored in communications. Here's what they're doing. Here's an idea. Oh, that looks interesting. Oh, well, I'll get you connected. Maybe you'll do an informational interview.
Right.
Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get that off the ground. Had discussions about it other places I've been. Just hasn't quite worked out. But that's always kind of been my vision. And again, not working in the in that side as much as the academic side, haven't been able to really get that going, unfortunately. But I think that would be very beneficial to have something like that, though.
Yeah, no doubt. I think I've heard that from others as well. I think it would be important to kind of tap into, because alumni want to help. I mean, they want to, if they're asked, I mean, it's a two-way street, obviously. They need to do it, and they need to be asked. But I think more schools need to tap into their alumni for that. So I always ask these fun questions. First question is, what advice would you give to freshmen in college, Jason?
Yeah, so I mean that's part of my job actually is giving advice. But the first thing I do with freshmen or any new student is build rapport, because they need to see you need to demonstrate to them that they can trust you and that you care. And so versus them sitting down and me just starting to throw out advice, I want to get to know them. Like I'll pull up Google Maps. Okay, let's look at your hometown. Let's
zoom in. This is just flipping, like you personally. Like if you had to, we always say you can go back in time and now what you knew then or whatever that goes. Anyway, like what advice would you given to yourself personally? Like knowing what to.
I was taking a little too literally right there because I'm like, I do this. I actually do this. But I think the informational interviews and the networking piece and starting that, and it's not too early to start that. You start that in high school, reaching out to people who have positions that you are interested in, and it's a big part of how I got into this field.
Right.
I reached out to the guy who was my academic advisor in college. He had moved on to the University of Illinois. I was teaching middle school here in Vegas. After about 3 weeks of that, I realized that if I stayed in teaching, I was going to go insane or become an alcoholic. So I'm like, all right, I got to do something different. I wanted to get into this. So I reached out and got all the advice and followed the steps that Jason Holtman, the guy who was my academic advisor, that he gave me. So I think being able to get comfortable with those conversations, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, trying to have different experiences too, and not be just focused in, your bubble of your team. If you're a student athlete or, your small group of friends, try to do some different things, consider different possibilities, learn as much as you can, and be prepared to go in different directions, maybe different from what you expect. Because getting into college, you might have this is what I want to do. Well, what if you get into that and you don't like it? You have to have some other areas to consider too. So I think taking advantage of that time to really explore and even if you think you know exactly what you want to do or you think you have things figured out, be open to other ideas and other possibilities.
Yeah, no, that's great. Being open idea. I love that. And then, what about senior Jason? Any advice to him that you give looking back?
Hmm. I mean, kind of along the same lines of really, and I was somebody, especially through high school, where if I wanted something done, I felt like the best way to do it was just do it myself
Yeah,
and take on a lot of stuff. And if it meant spending long hours on it or working on it and 10, 11 o'clock at night, do it. But like rely on other people a little bit more. Don't completely rely. Obviously, still be self-sufficient and do the work, but understand that it's okay to have other people help you get to where you need to be. Don't be so prideful that I have to do this all on my own.
right.
Um, which I think can be difficult for people sometimes. Is well if I ask for too much help, is it really me? No, you need
Right.
you need people to help you, whether that's with advice or references or just like, hey, here are the steps you need to follow, to be successful.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Now, let's talk about your transition out of sport. So you're done playing. You played baseball your whole life. You finished your college career. Um, Kind of what were your next steps, and then kind of piggyback off that. What advice, in a few words, not a whole big thing, but in a few words, like what advice would you give to athletes when it's time to transition out of sport?
You know, it is tough for me to just do a few words. I mean, sometimes I am a little long-winded,
Well,
but
we're gonna come
um,
down a little bit, but no, just again, like your transition, we talked
yeah.
offline, wasn't too difficult, but a lot of people do struggle. So, like, what kinds of advice could you give to people, like, as they're coming up on the end?
Yeah, and like you said, my transition was a little bit easier because redshirted my first year when I made the team as a walk on. Pitched in 11 games the next year. I pitched against Michigan and Florida and had a save against Michigan State. I'm like, okay, I might be a part of this program. I might be able to continue to develop, and who knows where it leads. Maybe I add an extra 5, 6 miles an hour on my fastball, and who knows. And then the next year I pitched in 2 games. The year
Right,
after that, I pitched in 1 game. And then going into my 5th year, they had me pitching a lot early in the fall. And then they called me over. The coaches called me over one day and they're like, yeah, we wanted to give you every opportunity to earn a spot on the team. But honestly, you're just not going to pitch much more than a couple games again this year. So we want to give the spot to a younger guy. And so then
right,
they let me kind of stay on as almost like a student coach, volunteer coach. So I was in coaching meetings and everything since I wanted to coach at that time.
right,
So, it, like I said, it was an easier transition because I kind of started to see it
right,
into my 3rd year, started my 4th year. Started hanging out a lot more with my secondary education classmates. So instead of going to the bar with teammates, I'm going to the bar with classmates and started hanging out with them more than I was hanging out and socializing with teammates. And it's interesting because I'll see that happen with some of my athletes where
yeah,
they start talking about, oh yeah, I've got my friends in this major. And I'm like, oh, it's kind of interesting how that happens. Where early in your career you're more with your teammates, but then as you get more into your major and you start seeing some of the same people in the same classes, you're doing group work with them, you're socializing with them outside of school more. So I think that's one thing that helps is if you can really get into your classes and your major and you start to see some of those same people, you have connections with them, start hanging out with them, start talking with them. Um, that can energize you to be as excited about, criminal justice or business or education or whatever it is. You can get that same excitement and enthusiasm that you've always had for your sport. So I think that's one thing that I try to encourage students to do is because I think that can help the transition because then you have people in that area um, who you can reach out to for advice and for support.
So today, and for quite a few years now, you've been in student athlete development. So talk about maybe, some of the creative ideas that you've had, to make it, just a successful process of, helping these students ultimately to, into their next careers.
Yeah, and I think ideas are really important. I read, it's probably about 8-9 years ago. I read about this guy James Altucher, and a guy who became a millionaire, lost all of his money, and then became a millionaire again. So he's been an author. He's Tim Ferriss. I don't know if you know Tim Ferriss, the 4 Hour Work Week, Tools of Titans, Tribe of Mentors, does a podcast of his own. But Tim Ferriss, I think, is where I first read about James Altucher. But one of the things that Altucher is big about is writing down 10 ideas per day. He says it exercises your creativity muscle. And so I've been a little inconsistent with it, but I do try to put down 10 ideas a day. Sometimes it's in my phone, sometimes it's in my laptop. I usually try to move them all into my laptop. Altucher says, throw them away when you're done. The point isn't to go back and review them, but I like to go back and review them because there might be something I wrote down 3 years ago that, oh, well, what if I tweaked it this way and
Right.
did this? And it's been successful. I think when I was at Grand Canyon, I was overseeing some of our staff. We had a young staff, so there were some things I wanted to do to try to build camaraderie with the staff and feeling of connection. And I think I'd also read a lot about. There's an article about Joe Madden, Steve Kerr, and Pete Carroll, and about the cultures they created within their teams. Kind of inspired me with some of these ideas as well, where one of them that it started as one of those 10 ideas a day was, let's have we call it the OSAD games. So we're the Office of Student Athlete Development, so OSAD. We weren't sad very often, but we were called OSAD. But I said, let's do the OSAD games, where each one of the teams at GCU, let's pick one game, and then we go to it as a staff, and we interact, and the advisor for that team can talk about, oh yeah, this kid over there is a pain to deal with, or oh, this kid's gonna be a doctor one day, and so we did that. We did that for a couple of years, and it all started just as writing down 10 ideas a day. There were a few other things that we did as well. I mentioned Tim Ferriss. So I had the idea of recreating what he did in the books, Tools of Titans and Tribe of Mentors. I just did it with our staff. Sent them the 11 questions that Tim Ferriss sent to all these different entrepreneurs and business leaders and authors and CEOs and athletes. Sent those to our staff. They sent them back to me, and then I basically did like a little podcast with them, and then wrote up kind of like in Tools of Titans form, put it all together, and we shared it with our staff. We all learned more about each other. Spent some time on that in our staff retreat. But all comes out of ideas and
Right.
writing down those ideas. Tim Ferriss even said, he's done that before, where he's like, hey, write down it, and even if it's a crazy idea, write it down or put it down there, because it might be stupid, but like it might lead to something else. Altucher says, if you can't think of 10 ideas, if you're having a hard time thinking of 10 ideas, then go for 20. With the idea being, don't censor yourself, just write everything down that comes to mind. Tim Ferriss, in something he wrote one time, said, he goes, I wrote down, give all my money away, cut off my left foot, and he puts in parentheses, WTF, but he's like, on those lists, sometimes what he gets out of it
Right.
is like, it sparks another idea that actually is realistic and might be worthwhile. With student athletes, something that came out of the 10 ideas a day was, sometimes we get so focused on the academics and like, okay, what do you have coming up this week? Oh, you have to get this done. You have to meet with this tutor. You have to do this. Oh, you have to get this grade up. We have to remember, that they're people too. They're not just athletes.
Right.
They're not just students. They're whole human beings, and we have to, help them holistically like that. One of the ideas I had, and I've implemented it, is every few weeks I will say, okay, think back the last 3-4 weeks. What have been 2 positive things that you've experienced? What's been 1 challenge or frustration? It could be school, it could be your sport, it could be life in general. And sometimes students will open up about certain things that we wouldn't have addressed it, without that. And then it helps me as
Right.
an advisor, helps me maybe help them a little bit more, or at least understand, especially sometimes when they talk about challenges, what they're going through. And it might adjust, how I approach working with them. And sometimes it's like I had a baseball player a few years ago. He said his challenge is fall semester, and he's a Dallas Cowboys fan. He's like, as well, my challenge is the Cowboys have lost 3 games in a row. So but even that, it
Right.
gives you some insight into their lives, and can be good.
Yeah, it's
So
important to them. Yeah.
you try to do some creative things like that, and I ask students sometimes for, hey, is there anything I can do more to help you? And I had a student last year who said, hey, can we maybe meet outside of your office sometime and maybe just walk? Because he's like, I can't sit still very well.
That's
All
great.
right.
That's
So
great. Yeah.
every few weeks, I would text him like, hey, let's meet downstairs by the athletic training room, and we'll walk across campus for our meeting. I would print out some stuff that we had to go over that I would maybe normally just show him on my computer
Sure.
screen, and we go over it right there. So, just being open to, again, those different ways of doing things, and
Yeah.
trying to, find different ways and more creative ways to help students.
Yeah. It's out of the
Sorry,
box.
that was more than a few words. Sorry.
No worries. So this has been great, Jason. We really appreciate all the time. Tell people how they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also I'm on Twitter, but I haven't been on it very much lately. Recently got on Facebook.
He hasn't been on it
So
since he changed to X. Right.
yeah. It's been a few months really since I've been on there. I mean, the Super 70s sports guy, I mean, he's the best reason to go on Twitter still these days. All the funny stuff that he puts on there, but. If you want to email me, it's jason.frank@unlv.edu. You can also find me on UNLV's athletics website and the staff directory, as with most athletic department staff. So you can find phone number and email address on there too. So.
Well, good deal. Well, again, we really appreciate you can find us at alumnidirect.com, and our show, it's across all the podcast networks as well as Alumni Direct's YouTube channel. We really encourage, every week we do this show, and there's so much great advice that comes from our guests like Jason, and just encourage people to watch and listen to the show. And if we can help just one, I mean, obviously we want to help a lot more than that, but I think there's a lot of athletes struggling out there, and we really want to make a difference. So again, everybody, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.